At 9:47 that night, my front doorbell woke me. My son stood outside with my daughter-in-law, two suitcases, and a moving truck. "Dad," he smiled, "we've decided to move in with you. You shouldn't live alone anymore." Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law handed me a laminated booklet. "Just 35 simple house rules," she said. I read the first page, then another. Every rule controlled my life inside my own home. I smiled, closed the booklet, and made one decision that would soon leave both of them completely pale with shock. Before this story begins, thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Leave a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. Please note, certain elements of this story are fictional, shaped to carry a meaningful message. Similarities to names or locations are coincidental, but what this story asks you to feel and consider is entirely intentional. The watch needed polishing every Saturday evening. That was the rule I had kept for 3 years, ever since the house went quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with a soft cloth and a small tin of brass polish, working the tarnish out of the case the way Mary had taught me. She had inherited the watch from her grandmother, a small gold oval with a worn clasp, and Roman numerals faded to ghosts. And she had worn it every day of our marriage until the morning she couldn't lift her arm anymore. After she passed, I kept it in the kitchen drawer beside the dish towels where she used to keep it. Every Saturday I took it out, polished it until the gold caught the light, and put it back. It was a small thing, but small things were what kept a house from becoming just a building. Outside the kitchen window, the orange trees stood in the dark. Mary had planted the first one the spring we moved in when Daniel was 4 years old, and still believed that fruit grew overnight. She planted one every few years after that until we had 7 trees along the back fence, heavy with fruit from October through January. The whole neighborhood could smell them when the Santa Ana winds came through. On those evenings, Mary used to open every window in the house and say the same thing every time: "God is showing off again, Arthur." I had just finished buffing the clasp when the headlights swept across the kitchen wall. I set the watch down on the cloth. A vehicle was pulling into my driveway, not a car, something larger. The engine was too loud for the quiet street, and the headlights were too high off the ground. I heard the parking brake engage, then 2 doors opening. I checked the clock above the stove. 9:47. The knock at the front door came hard. Not the knock of someone who wasn't sure they were welcome. The knock of someone who had already decided. I pushed back from the table and walked down the hallway, past the framed photographs Mary had arranged along the wall. Daniel at his Little League games. Our trip to Yosemite the summer he turned 12. The 2 of us at the IBEW local 11 retirement dinner. Mary laughing at something I had said, with her whole face the way she always did. I put my hand on the doorknob and opened it. Daniel stood on the porch under the yellow light. My son. 34 years old, wearing a jacket I didn't recognize, his dark hair shorter than the last time I had seen him at Easter. His eyes were bright in a way that made my chest tighten, not with joy exactly, but with something that wanted to be joy and wasn't quite. Behind him, Kelly stood with her hands clasped in front of her coat. She was composed in the way of someone who had rehearsed this moment. She smiled when the door opened, but the smile arrived a half-second too late, like an actor catching a cue. "Dad." Daniel stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, and I held him. He smelled like the drive down from wherever they had been, like cold air and fast food, and something underneath that was still no matter what, my boy. My throat tightened around everything I wanted to say. "Daniel." I pulled back and looked at him. "What's going on? Why didn't you call? We wanted to surprise you." He was grinning now, but his jaw was working too hard the way it had when he was 9 years old and trying to talk me out of something he'd already done. "We've been thinking about this for a while, Dad. You're out here alone and we worry. We worry all the time. Kelly stepped forward and extended her hand. Her grip was firm and dry. "Arthur, it's so good to see you. We've missed you." She called me Arthur. Not Dad, not Mr. Bennett. Arthur like a colleague she respected from a professional distance. "You should have called," I said again. "I would have made up the guest room. We didn't want you to go to any trouble." She gestured toward the truck behind her, a rental I could see now with the back hatch standing open. Boxes were stacked inside. Suitcases. Furniture wrapped in moving blankets. We figured the easier thing was just to come. My chest did something I didn't have a name for. Not alarm. Not quite. More like the feeling I used to get on a job site when I tested a circuit and the meter read something that wasn't supposed to be possible, that still careful attention of a man who knows something is wrong but doesn't yet know where. "Come in," I said. They brought the first load through the door while I stood back watching. Kelly moved through the hallway with the confidence of someone taking inventory. Her eyes went to the baseboards, the light fixtures, the ceiling. She paused in the kitchen doorway and looked at the layout with an expression I couldn't read before she smiled again and said, "I love these old Pasadena kitchens. So much character." Daniel set 2 bags down near the staircase and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked at me with something working behind his eyes, something he was keeping down. "It'll just be for a little while, Dad. Things have been complicated." "What kind of complicated?" He opened his mouth. Kelly touched his arm once lightly, and he closed it. "We can talk about everything tomorrow," she said. "Tonight, let's just get settled. We're exhausted from the drive." She reached into her tote bag then. I thought she was getting her phone. Instead, she withdrew a document, 20 pages, maybe more, bound with a binder clip and covered in a plastic sleeve. She set it on my kitchen table right beside the cloth where Mary's watch was resting. "I put together a little house management guide," she said, "just so everyone's on the same page. It covers routines, shared expenses, household responsibilities. Nothing complicated." She tapped the cover once with one manicured fingernail. "Structure helps everyone feel comfortable." I picked it up. The cover page read in clean black type, "House Management Manual. Bennett Residence, Pasadena, CA." I turned to the first page, then the second. Then I kept reading. "Breakfast preparation by 6:30. Common areas vacated by 9 p.m. IBEW pension deposits to be redirected to joint household account. All decisions regarding property maintenance, renovation, and financial management to be made jointly by Daniel and Kelly Bennett." Daniel was adjusting the strap on one of the bags. He was not looking at me. His shoulders were curved forward, like a man bracing for weather he could already feel coming, and he kept his eyes on the floor with the particular determination of someone who has chosen not to see something. That hurt more than the document, more than any of the 35 rules I hadn't finished reading. I set the manual down on the table. I looked at my son, really looked at him the way a father does when he's trying to find the boy he raised inside the man standing in front of him. Then I looked at Kelly. She was watching me with patient, professional attention, waiting. I picked up Mary's watch from the cloth, closed my hand around it. "Well," I said, "that's thorough." Kelly's smile settled into something satisfied. Daniel finally looked up. The relief on his face was the worst thing I had seen all evening. The relief of a man who had been dreading something and decided too soon that it had passed. I excused myself to finish making up the guest room. As I walked down the hallway past Mary's photographs, I pressed my thumb against the worn clasp of the watch until I could feel my own pulse. Something was wrong. I had spent 30 years reading broken circuits in the dark. I knew what a fault felt like before I ever found the wire. I did not sleep well that night. I lay on my side of the bed, The right side, always the right side, because Mary had claimed the left for 31 years, and some habits outlast the people who made them. And I stared at the ceiling while the house made its nighttime sounds around me. The pipes, the refrigerator cycling on and off, the old eucalyptus in the front yard brushing against the eave when the wind picked up. Somewhere down the hall I could hear Kelly's voice, low and even, talking on her phone past midnight. I could not make out the words. I did not need to. By the time the sky through the curtains went from black to gray, I had made a decision. I would not react. I would not argue. I would watch and I would listen, and I would learn exactly what I was dealing with before I did anything at all. 30 years of union electrical work had taught me that the most dangerous thing a man could do on a job site was start pulling wire before he understood the full circuit. You had to trace the whole thing first, every connection, every junction. Then you acted. I got up at 5:30 and went to the kitchen. The coffee maker was gone from its spot on the counter beside the window, the spot where it had sat for 11 years. In its place was a sleek, stainless machine I did not recognize with a touchscreen and a reservoir the size of a small aquarium. A handwritten card propped against it read, "Use this one. Better for everyone. Better for—" I stood there in my robe looking at that card for a long moment. Then I opened the cabinet above the counter where I kept my coffee. The shelf had been reorganized overnight. My Folgers was on the bottom, pushed to the back behind 2 bags of something called single-origin Ethiopian roast. I took my Folgers out, found my old percolator in the cabinet beneath the stove where it had apparently been relocated, and made my coffee the way I had always made it. While it brewed, I opened the kitchen drawer for Mary's watch. It was still there. I pressed my fingertips against the worn gold case just to be sure. Then I put it back. By 7 o'clock, Kelly was in the kitchen with a clipboard. She was dressed for a workday, pressed blouse, dark slacks, hair pulled back. She moved through the room with a kind of ownership that turned my stomach, opening cabinets to check their contents, making small notations on her clipboard, nodding at things she approved of, and making a different face at things she didn't. "Good morning, Arthur." She poured herself coffee from the new machine without asking whether I'd figured out how to use it. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I said. The coffee maker moved. The old one was dripping on the counter. "I ordered a better one." She said it pleasantly without looking up from her clipboard. "The Wi-Fi password is on the whiteboard in the hallway. I updated the network last night. The old one had security issues." I wrapped both hands around my mug. That was my network. "I know," she smiled. "This one's faster." Daniel came downstairs at 7:30, still pulling on his jacket, and kissed Kelly on the cheek before he poured his own coffee. He looked at me over his mug, with eyes that were tired, and asking me something I was not yet ready to answer. "Morning, Dad." "Morning." I set my mug down. "Come outside with me a minute." Kelly glanced up from her clipboard. Daniel looked at her just a flicker, half a second, and then back at me. "Sure," he said. We stood on the back porch in the cool October morning, the orange trees still holding the last of the night's shadows in their branches. I put my hands in my robe pockets and looked at my son. "Tell me what's really going on," I said. "Not the version you practiced in the car on the way down. The real version." Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked out at the orange trees, and I watched his throat move as he swallowed whatever he'd been about to say. "Things have been tight, Dad. The company's been doing some restructuring and my position got reclassified. It cut my salary about 20%. How long has this been going on? 8 months, maybe 9. He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand, a gesture he'd had since he was 12 years old. "Kelly's fund has been going through a rough patch, too. We had an apartment in Silver Lake, but the lease situation got complicated, and we needed to—" He stopped. Started again. It made sense to come here for a little while, just until things stabilize. I watched his face while he talked. The way he chose words carefully, the way he left spaces where there should have been specifics. He was telling me some of the truth, not all of it. The parts he left out were the parts he was either ashamed of or afraid of, and I had known my son long enough to understand that with Daniel, those two things were usually the same thing. "What about the manual Kelly put together?" I asked. His neck flushed red. "She just likes having systems. It's how she operates." "Daniel," I kept my voice even. "That document says your name and Kelly's name go on decisions about my house." He looked at the orange trees. His hands found his jacket pockets and stayed there. "It's just while we're here, Dad. It's so things run smoothly." He finally looked at me and his eyes were doing something painful, that particular look of a man who is asking his father not to push on the thing that is already bruised. Can we try it for a little while, please?" I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I nodded once and went inside. I was in the garage that afternoon oiling the hinges on the side door when I heard the knock at the fence gate. Rosa Medina came through carrying a ceramic dish covered in foil, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, wearing the yellow cardigan she put on whenever she was making a point of being neighborly, which usually meant she was about to say something direct. "I brought tamales," she said, handing me the dish. "The pork ones. Mary's favorite." My chest squeezed around that. "Thank you, Rosa." She leaned against the workbench and crossed her arms. She did not pretend to look at anything other than what she was looking at. "I saw the truck last night. I saw them bringing boxes in until 11 o'clock. She tilted her head toward the house. "How long are they staying?" "They haven't said exactly." Rosa pressed her lips together. "Arthur, that woman was on her phone in your driveway this morning at 6:15, measuring something with her hand against your front window. I saw it from my kitchen." Her dark eyes were steady and serious. "That is not a woman who came here to take care of her father-in-law." My jaw tightened. "She's Daniel's wife. I know exactly who she is." Rosa put her hand on my arm, her grip firm. "I'm telling you what I saw. My husband's sister lost her house to her son-in-law's family. 18 months, Arthur. It happened one small thing at a time, and by the time she understood what was happening, it was already done." She held my gaze. "Mary would not have let this happen." The words landed somewhere deep and stayed there. That evening after dinner, I found the living room rearranged, the armchair Mary had reupholstered. The summer before she got sick, moved 3 feet to the left, a stack of Kelly's design magazines on the coffee table that had held only a single lamp and a coaster for 30 years. I stood in the doorway, looking at it, my hand gripping the frame, until I could feel the wood grain pressing into my palm. Then I went to bed. I lay on the right side and looked at the ceiling, and let what Rosa had said settle into the true and necessary shape of things. One small thing at a time. I understood circuits. I understood systems. And I understood for the first time since they had knocked on my door the night before that this was not going to be a problem I could talk my way through with my son. The van showed up on a Monday morning, white with no markings, parking in front of my house at 8 o'clock sharp. 2 men climbed out carrying equipment cases and a coil of low-voltage cable. I was drinking my second cup of coffee on the back porch when Kelly came to find me, her clipboard already in hand. "We're having a security system installed today," she said. "Ring Pro cameras, 6 units. Front door, back door, driveway, kitchen, hallway, living room." She said it the way a person announces something that has already been decided and is only being mentioned out of courtesy. "It'll give everyone peace of mind." I looked at her over my mug. "When did we discuss this?" "I mentioned it last week." She had not mentioned it last week. It's for your safety, Arthur, in case you fall or need help and Daniel and I aren't home. She smiled with her teeth. The footage goes to cloud storage. We can check on things from our phones. I set my mug down on the porch railing. I see. The technicians will be done by noon. She was already turning back toward the house. Try not to be in their way. I stayed on the porch and watched the two men carry their equipment through my front door. I did not say anything to them. I was too busy thinking. The Ring Pro was a system I knew. In my last 5 years at IBEW Local 11, before I took my pension, I had done electrical work on 3 commercial properties that used the same platform, motion-activated continuous recording footage, uploaded automatically to cloud servers registered to whoever owned the account. In this case, that would be Kelly. Not me. Kelly. I walked around the house slowly, while the technicians worked hands in my pockets, watching where each camera went. Front door covered the porch and the street. Driveway covered both vehicles. Kitchen covered the table, the counter, the door to the garage. Hallway covered the staircase and both bedroom doors. Living room covered the couch, the front window, and Mary's armchair. Every room where a person might say something they didn't want recorded. And every room where a person might look confused or disoriented or unsteady on their feet. I understood then, with the particular clarity that comes from 30 years of reading systems, exactly what those cameras were for. They were not there to protect me. They were there to watch me, to collect evidence, to build a record of an old man living alone in a house worth $1.2 million in a neighborhood where that number went up every year. Frank Kowalski arrived at 2 in the afternoon, the way he always arrived unannounced, carrying something already talking, before the door was fully open. I brought 2 Coronas and my opinion, he said, holding up the bottles. You only asked for one of them. Frank had worked beside me at IBEW Local 11 for 19 years. He was 70 years old now, tall and lean with a gray mustache. He kept trimmed short and hands like leather from 4 decades of electrical work. He had retired 2 years before I did, and spent most of his days fixing things that didn't need fixing in his garage on Mentor Avenue. He was the best electrician I had ever known, and the most stubborn man I had ever liked. We sat in the 2 lawn chairs under the biggest orange tree, the first one Mary had planted, and I told him about the cameras, while he drank his Corona and looked at the new units mounted above the back door. Ring Pro, he said. 6 units. He took a long drink. That's not a safety system, Art. That's a surveillance network. I know what it is. Cloud storage registered in whose name? Kelly's. He turned the bottle in his hands. So she can pull footage anytime she wants. Looking for what exactly? Looking for anything she can use. I kept my voice level. She's building something, Frank. I don't know the full shape of it yet. Frank looked at me with the eyes of a man who had spent decades diagnosing problems other people had missed. What are you going to do? I finished my beer before I answered. I'm going to give her cameras something to record, and I'm going to record something of my own. He raised an eyebrow. You still have those Reolink units from the Hendersons' job, 3 of them, in the garage. Frank almost smiled. Chasing you up on a ladder at 65 years old. Mary would have had something to say about that. Mary would have handed me the drill, I said. That night after Daniel and Kelly had gone upstairs, I went to the garage. I found the 3 Reolink cameras I had purchased 2 years ago for a home renovation project. I never finished small units. Wide-angle lens local storage to a hard drive in my office. No cloud account. No third-party server. Mine. Completely mine. I mounted the first one above the kitchen doorway, angled to cover the table and the counter. Took me 11 minutes. My hands moved the way they always moved on a job certain economical without waste. The second unit went in the hallway near the linen closet, covering the approach to the guest room. The third I mounted in the living room, positioned above the bookshelf Mary had painted white the summer Daniel was in 6th grade, angled toward the front window and the sitting area. I ran the cable behind the baseboards the way I had run wire for 30 years, invisible, clean, exactly the way the work was supposed to be done. Then I sat down at my desk in the office and connected the hard drive to my laptop. The screen came to life. 3 feeds appeared in a grid. Kitchen, hallway, living room. The resolution was sharp enough to read the spines of the books on Mary's shelf. I sat back in my chair. My chest felt different than it had all week, not lighter exactly, but steadier, like a man who has been standing in the dark and finally found the breaker panel. A homeowner had every right under California law to install security cameras in his own residence. No permission needed, no notification required. These were my walls, my ceilings, my 30 years of mortgage payments that had made this house mine in a way that 20 pages of laminated rules could never undo. I opened the small notebook I kept in my desk drawer and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Below it I wrote camera system self-installed, local storage only, recording begins tonight. Then I wrote one more line, let her think she's the only one watching. I turned off the desk lamp. Through the office window, the orange trees were black shapes against the Pasadena night sky. 7 trees Mary had planted one by one over 30 years. I could smell them faintly through the glass, that clean, sharp citrus smell that had meant home to me since the day we moved in. I picked up my coffee mug, found it empty, and went to make another. The kitchen camera's red light blinked once as I passed beneath it. Not her light. Mine. Every evening after 10 o'clock, when the house had settled and the light under the guest room door had gone dark, I sat down at my desk and opened the footage from the day. I had set the system to record in 4-hour segments, time-stamped and labeled by camera position. I watched them the way I used to review blueprints before a big job, methodically from the beginning, not skipping ahead, not assuming I already knew what mattered. 30 years of electrical work had cured me of assumptions. Assumptions were how people got hurt. The first night, there was nothing that surprised me. Kelly moving through the kitchen with her clipboard. Daniel eating breakfast standing up, his eyes on his phone, his shoulders carrying the particular weight of a man who has stopped expecting good news. Kelly speaking on her phone near the back window, her voice inaudible through the camera's microphone. At that distance, her free hand moving in small, precise gestures, the way it did when she was negotiating something. The second night was different. The kitchen camera caught her at 7:40 in the morning, standing at the counter, with her own phone pressed flat to the surface, face up, the speaker engaged. The voice on the other end was male, businesslike, speaking quickly. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Projected timeline, liquid assets, transfer of management authority. And then Kelly, her voice lowered but distinct. The old man has no idea. We just need a few more weeks. I stopped the footage, rewound it, played it again. My hand was steady on the mouse. My breathing was steady. But something in my chest had gone very still, the way a room goes still when the power cuts out and you realize how much noise you had stopped hearing. I wrote it down in my notebook. Date, time, camera position. Her exact words in quotation marks. I had learned in the union that the value of a record was in its precision. Approximations were worthless. Exact words, exact times, exact dates, those were the things that held up. By the end of the first week, I had 4 pages of notes. Day 4, footage showed Kelly in the living room with a tape measure moving along the wall between the front window and the bookcase, making notes in a small leather journal she kept in her tote bag. She measured the width of the doorway to the dining room twice, wrote something down, and then stood back and looked at the space with the expression of someone mentally replacing everything in it. Day 6 was harder to watch. The hallway camera caught Daniel and Kelly in the guest room doorway late in the evening. The door was half open, and they were speaking in the low, tight voices of people who have learned to argue quietly. I turned up the volume on my laptop. "This is going too far, Kel." Daniel's voice had the frayed sound of someone who had been saying the same thing for a long time without being heard. "He's my father. This is his house. You want to go back to that apartment?" Kelly's voice was steady and cold, the way water is cold, not cruel, just indifferent to temperature. "With that debt, with what we owe." A pause. "Then let me handle it. You said you'd let me handle it." A longer pause. Then Daniel very quietly, "Okay." One word. The saddest word I had ever heard my son say. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark office for a long time, my hands flat on the desk, feeling the grain of the wood under my palms. My eyes were burning, though I was not going to cry. I was 65 years old, and I had buried my wife, and I had learned something about the difference between grief and anger, and the particular thing that was neither of those, the hollow, aching knowledge that someone you love is suffering and has chosen the suffering over the alternative of asking for help. Rosa came on a Thursday morning with a dish of tamales, and the look on her face that meant she had been thinking about something for several days and had finally decided to say it. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and she told me about her husband's cousin, a woman named Dolores, who had lived alone in a house in Alhambra for 30 years after her husband died. Her son-in-law's family had moved in to help. 18 months later, Dolores was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Azusa, and the house had been sold. "She never saw it coming," Rosa said. "Each thing by itself seemed small. The car moved to the street. The bedroom changed. The mail went to a different address." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked at me directly. By the time she understood the signatures were already on the papers, my throat tightened. "That's not going to happen here." "I know it isn't." Rosa reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her grip was warm and certain. "Because you're not Dolores Arthur. You're the most organized, most stubborn man I have ever known." She paused. "But I need you to hear what I'm telling you." "I hear you." "Mary would not have let this happen." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were not. "She would have seen it on the first night." The words moved through me like current through a wire, that specific physical sensation of something essential traveling from one point to another. I looked out the kitchen window at the orange trees. The morning light was coming through the branches in long, flat lines, the way it did in October, turning the fruit gold before it was ready. "She would have," I said. "She always saw things before I did." Rosa squeezed my hand once, then let go and picked up her coffee. That evening, I sat down at my desk for my nightly review of the footage. I almost didn't watch the last segment. The hallway camera, 11:47 p.m. Because by that point I was tired, and the notebook already had more in it than I had expected. But I watched it. The hallway camera showed the guest room door opening. Kelly came out in a robe phone in hand. She stood in the hallway just outside the door and spoke quietly, but without the cautious murmur she used during the day. She thought the house was asleep. She thought no one was listening. "We don't need him to sign anything," she said. Her voice was crisp and businesslike, the voice of someone reporting progress to a colleague. "We just need the court to say he can't." I did not move for a long time after I heard that. Then I opened my desk drawer and took out the business card I had been keeping there for 2 weeks, moving it from one side of the drawer to the other. Each time I opened it, not yet ready to use it, telling myself there might be another way. The card was cream-colored, with black lettering. Thaddeus Vance, Attorney at Law. Colorado Boulevard, Pasadena. I set it on the desk in front of me and looked at it for a long moment. My heart was beating hard now, harder than I wanted it to. My hands, when I pressed them flat on the desk to steady myself, were trembling slightly at the fingertips, not from fear, but from the particular physical response of a man whose body understands something before his mind has finished deciding. Thaddeus had been my attorney for 14 years. He had written Mary's will. He had set up the trust after she passed. He was the son of a union man, and he understood, without needing it, explained what it meant when someone tried to take something a person had spent a working life building. I picked up my phone. It was 12 minutes past midnight. I would call him in the morning. But I already knew, sitting there in the dark office with my hands still trembling and the orange trees invisible beyond the window, that the time for watching had almost run out. I told Kelly I had a routine checkup. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop coffee going cold, beside her fingers, moving across the keyboard, with the focused efficiency of someone who had already decided what the day was going to look like and was simply executing it. She glanced up when I said it, one brief assessing look, and then went back to her screen. "Okay," she said. That was all. No follow-up. No doctor. Or do you need a ride? Or when will you be back? A woman who had genuinely moved into her father-in-law's home out of concern for his well-being would have asked at least one of those questions. Kelly asked none of them because the information held no value for hers. What I did when I was away from the house was not her concern. What I did when I came back was, I put on my jacket, picked up my keys, and touched my shirt pocket once to confirm that Mary's watch was there. I had been carrying it on difficult days since she passed, a habit I had never mentioned to anyone, a small private anchor for mornings, when the weight of things pressed down harder than usual. She would have understood it. She understood most things about me that I never said out loud. The drive to Colorado Boulevard took 20 minutes in the November morning traffic. I parked on the street and sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the building, a 3-story structure wedged between a Vietnamese sandwich shop and an insurance office, its facade the color of old concrete, a hand-lettered directory in the lobby window listing the tenants on each floor. Second floor, Thaddeus Vance, Attorney at Law. The elevator had a handwritten out-of-order sign taped to the doors with masking tape that had yellowed at the edges, which told me it had been out of order for some time. I took the stairs. Thaddeus was at his window when I pushed open the frosted glass door, standing with his coffee mug in both hands, looking out at the San Gabriel Mountains, the way he did when he was working through something complicated in his head and needed the distance of the view to organize it. He was 67 years old, big through the shoulders, with a close-trimmed white beard and reading glasses pushed up into his hair, where they lived permanently, whether he was using them or not. He wore a dark vest over a blue shirt, no tie, the uniform of a man who had long since made enough of a reputation that he no longer needed to prove it with his clothes. His father had been a pipe fitter with IBEW Local 250 out of Pomona. Thaddeus had gone to law school instead of the trades which his father had never fully forgiven him for and had privately been proud of every day since. I had known Thaddeus for 14 years. He had written Mary's will. He had set up the trust after she passed, sitting across from me at that same desk, while I was still in the raw early grief of it, walking me through documents I could barely concentrate on, and being patient enough about it that I had never forgotten. He turned when he heard me come in. "Art." He set his mug down and nodded toward the chair across his desk. "Sit down. You look like you've been carrying something heavy for a while." "Since October," I said. I set everything on his desk. The notebook, 41 pages of documented incidents, each entry dated and timed to the minute. The USB drive, with footage from my Reolink cameras sorted by date and labeled. A full printed copy of the house management manual, all 20 pages, Kelly's signature in ink on the cover sheet. A set of photographs from my phone, the Ring Pro cameras mounted at every angle in my home. The rearranged kitchen cabinets, the living room with its new measurements marked in Kelly's handwriting on a notepad she had left on the windowsill. Thaddeus put his glasses on and went through it the way he went through everything, without commentary, without expression, taking it in at the pace the material required. He watched footage on his laptop, replaying one clip twice. He read 8 pages of my notebook, moving his lips slightly on the entries he was committing to memory. He held the house management manual by its edges and turned it over once in his hands before setting it back on the desk. Then he looked at me over the rims of his glasses. She signed this herself. It was not a question. He tapped the cover page with one finger. Front page. Her full name in ink. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but the controlled expression of a man who has spent 4 decades in courtrooms and has learned to keep his satisfaction private until the appropriate moment. Art, she built your case for you. Every page of this document is her own signature on an attempt to assert unauthorized control over your home. He leaned back in his chair. Now, tell me about the trust. Still in place, I said. Exactly as we set it up. Good. He folded his hands on the desk, a gesture I recognized, the one that meant he had already thought 3 steps ahead and was about to explain where they led. 2 years ago, when Mary passed, we transferred this property into an irrevocable trust. That means the house does not belong to you as an individual anymore. It belongs to the trust instrument. No single person can sell it, transfer it, mortgage it, or sign it away without going through the legal structure of the trust itself. He held my gaze. Kelly can want that house every day for the rest of her life. She cannot take it. Not through a signature. Not through pressure. Not through any document she could put in front of you at a kitchen table. The loosening in my chest was physical, something that had been locked and pulling since October, releasing all at once like a wire finally finding ground. However, Thaddeus said, and his voice shifted into the register he used for the parts people needed to hear most carefully. There is another avenue she can pursue. If she can convince a California court that you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs financially, personally, medically, the court can grant what's called a conservatorship. Under California probate code, that would give Kelly and Daniel legal authority over your finances, your decisions, your daily life. A pause. The camera's art. That's what they're for. They're not watching for your safety. They're watching for anything they can use to build that argument. My jaw tightened until I could feel it in my back teeth. Then we build a better argument. Exactly right. He picked up a legal pad and uncapped his pen. Here is what we are going to do. I'm going to open a monitored personal account for your pension deposits. Every transaction above $50 sends an automatic notification directly to my office. Timestamp, amount, destination. If she moves a single dollar, I know within the hour. He wrote something, then looked up. I'm also filing a notification with Adult Protective Services today. As your attorney of record in California, I am a mandatory reporter. A PS will open a monitoring file and coordinate with us if the situation escalates. And if she files for conservatorship, Thaddeus looked at me with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who has delivered difficult news in enough rooms to know exactly how to hold a person's gaze when he does it. Then we make certain that when the court investigator walks through your front door, they meet the most organized, clear-minded, and thoroughly documented 65-year-old in the state of California. A beat. Can you do that? I thought about the early shift calls in January, standing in a flooded utility trench in Burbank at 5:30 in the morning, tracing a fault line through 200 feet of buried conduit without a schematic because the original had been lost in a remodel. I thought about the 1994 strike 3 months. No income, Mary and I eating carefully and not telling Daniel why. I thought about every job that had gone wrong in ways nobody planned for, and the particular discipline of staying useful when everything around you was trying to make you panic. "I've done harder things than this," I said. Thaddeus nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, turning his pen in his fingers. Then he said more quietly, "Art. What we're about to do is entirely within the law. But before it helps Daniel, it is going to hurt him. He is going to find out things about his wife that he does not know yet. Are you prepared for that?" I looked past him at the window. The San Gabriel Mountains were pale in the November light, the same range Mary used to point to from our kitchen on clear mornings, saying she could never quite believe they were real, that something that large and permanent existed just at the edge of an ordinary day. "Daniel is already hurting," I said. "He just doesn't know what from yet." Thaddeus walked me to the top of the stairs when I left. At the landing, he put his hand on my shoulder, briefly firmly, the way men of a certain age say the things they have decided words are insufficient for. I drove home on the surface streets the long way through the neighborhoods where the jacaranda trees had dropped their blossoms and the sidewalks were going gold with November leaves. Mary's watch was warm against my chest through the shirt pocket. For the first time in weeks, the thing I was carrying felt less like weight and more like direction. Kelly brought it up on a Tuesday evening after dinner while Daniel was loading the dishwasher, and she was wiping down the counter with the particular thoroughness of someone who wanted to appear domestic. "I've been thinking," she said, folding the cloth into a neat square, "about your pension deposits, the IBEW checks. It would be so much simpler if they went into a shared account. We could handle the utilities automatically, the insurance, the property taxes. Less for you to track." She smiled across the counter at me. "It just makes sense." Daniel kept his back to us. His shoulders were stiff the way they got when he knew what was coming and had already decided not to intervene. I set down my coffee mug. "That does make sense," I said. Kelly blinked. She had been ready for resistance. The agreement landed on her like a question she hadn't prepared for, and I watched her recalibrate behind her eyes in the space of half a second. "Oh, good." She slid a single sheet of paper across the counter. "I just need your signature on the transfer authorization." I read it slowly, signed it, handed it back. The account number on that form was not Kelly's. It was a personal account I had opened at Wells Fargo on Lake Avenue 2 weeks earlier, after my meeting with Thaddeus. Every transaction above $50 triggered an automatic notification to Thaddeus's office amount timestamp destination. Simple. Clean. The kind of system a careful man sets up when he already knows what the other person is going to do and wants to make sure there is a record of it when they do it. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The call came the following afternoon. I was in the garage sharpening a chisel when my phone rang. 6 hours and 14 minutes, Thaddeus said. There was something in his voice I had not heard before, a controlled tightness, the voice of a man holding something serious very carefully. "From the moment your pension deposit cleared, she moved every dollar into an LLC account registered to her venture fund. I have the wire transfer records. Routing number timestamped the destination account in her name." A pause. "Art under California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 15,610. What she just did is elder financial abuse. That's a felony. Not a civil matter, a felony." I put the chisel down on the workbench. My hand was trembling. Not the fine trembling of cold or tiredness, but the deeper trembling of a man whose body is responding to something his mind is still catching up to. This was real now. Whatever had been a suspicion, a pattern, a collection of footnotes in a small notebook, had just become something with legal weight and consequence. I walked out to the garden. I stood between the orange trees and looked up through the branches at the November sky, pale and clear above Pasadena. "Mary," my voice came out rougher than I intended. "I wish you were here to see how smart Thad is." The trees didn't answer. The wind moved through the leaves with that dry, papery sound it made in November, and the smell of the fruit surrounded me clean and sharp, the same smell that had meant home to me for 30 years. I pressed my palm flat against the trunk of the first tree she had planted. The bark was rough and warm from the afternoon sun. Then Thaddeus spoke again. "Art. There's something else." His voice had shifted quieter, now more careful. "I pulled the credit records associated with your home address. There are 3 hard money loans registered here. Private lenders. The total is $400,000. A pause that felt like a held breath. "Your house is listed as collateral, and the co-signer on all 3 documents is Daniel." The orange tree held still under my hand. "Say that again?" I said. Thaddeus said it again. Slowly. Every number. My chest felt hollowed out, not with anger, not yet, but with something worse. The particular sickness of a parent who realizes all at once that the person they have been worrying about protecting their home from is also the person whose life has been quietly dismantled without his knowledge. "I'll be at your office tomorrow," I said. I stood in the garden until the light changed. The fruit hung heavy on the branches above me, gold in the late afternoon sun, and I pressed both hands against the bark of Mary's tree and breathed until the trembling in my hands went still. Before I tell you what Thaddeus found in those loan documents, something that changed everything. I thought I knew about my own son. Drop the number 7 in the comments right now. Just a 7. That tells me you are still here, and it means more to me than you know. And a small note before we continue, parts of this story have been shaped with fictional details for depth and storytelling purposes. It may not reflect any one specific situation. If that's not the kind of story you came for, this is a perfectly fine place to step away. But if you're staying, what comes next will surprise you. I was at Thaddeus's office before 8. He had the documents waiting, 3 sets of papers laid out across his desk in a row, each bound with a binder clip, each bearing the letterhead of a different private lending company. He had brewed a second pot of coffee and poured me a cup without asking, which told me he had been here since early and knew I would need it. I sat down and looked at the papers. Hard money loans. I knew what they were: short-term, high-interest financing from private investors, money that moved faster than bank approval processes and collected with far less patience. I had seen younger men on job sites try to finance tools and equipment that way when they were starting out and didn't have the credit history for conventional lending. It had never ended well for any of them. The interest rates on hard money loans were not suggestions. They were architecture designed to capture people who had run out of other options. I picked up the first set. The address on the letterhead was mine. 143 North Arroyo Boulevard, Pasadena. The property listed as collateral was described in language I recognized from our mortgage paperwork 30 years ago: square footage, lot dimensions, assessed value. $1.2 million. My house. Used as security for a loan I had never agreed to, never been told about, never signed. I turned to the third page. The co-signer signature was my son's name in my son's handwriting. Except it wasn't. I had seen Daniel's signature more times than I could count. On the birthday cards he sent every year without fail, Mary had insisted on it, and the habit had outlasted her. On the paperwork for his first car, a used Civic he had driven off a lot in Monrovia when he was 23, so nervous, he had signed in the wrong box twice and had to start over. On the lease agreement for his first apartment in Silver Lake, which he had brought to me because he was 22 years old and wanted someone he trusted to tell him the numbers were reasonable. I had sat at this same kitchen table with that lease spread out between us, and Mary had made sandwiches, and Daniel had been so careful and earnest about the whole thing that it had made my chest tight with something I didn't have a name for at the time. I knew his signature, the way I knew the wiring in my own house, not by looking at it, but by something older than observation, by the specific angle of the D, by the way the loop of the B closed or didn't, by 34 years of watching my son put his name on things. I put the paper down flat on the desk and pressed 2 fingers against the signature. "He didn't sign this," I said. Thaddeus set his coffee mug down. "No, he didn't." He picked up his reading glasses and turned them in his hands rather than putting them on a gesture I had come to recognize over 14 years as the one he made when he was about to say something he had prepared carefully. "A forensic document examiner reviewed all 3 instruments yesterday evening. The signatures attributed to Daniel on each document were not produced by him. They were copied, traced from existing signatures on file. Kelly had access to his lease agreements, his tax filings, his personal records." He set the glasses on the desk. "Under California Penal Code 470, producing a forged signature on a financial instrument is a felony charge separate from the elder financial abuse charge under Welfare and Institutions Code 15,610 and separate from the unauthorized use of your property as collateral under Penal Code 532F. He looked at me steadily. "Art, she didn't just attempt to take your house. She used your son's legal identity to do it. Daniel has no idea that his name is attached to $400,000 of private debt." The room went very still. I had arrived at that office with anger organized and ready, the way I used to organize a job site before a difficult pull, everything sorted and accounted for, nothing left to chance. Anger was useful. Anger could be directed. I had been running on it for weeks, and it had served me better than grief would have. But what moved through me when Thaddeus finished speaking was not anger. It was something older and heavier and more specific, the particular pain of a father who has spent months watching his son and believing the worst of him and discovering all at once that he was wrong. Not that Daniel was innocent of weakness or avoidance or choosing the easier path when the harder one was available. He was guilty of all of that. But he had not been a partner in what Kelly had built. He had been a tool she used the same way she had tried to use my house, a resource with a value that could be extracted and redirected without his knowledge or consent. She had taken his name, his credit, his legal identity, without a word, without hesitation. "He doesn't know," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. "No." Thaddeus watched me carefully. "He doesn't know any of it." I pressed both hands flat on my knees and looked past him at the wall, where he kept a framed photograph of his father, a broad man in EBEW work clothes, standing beside a section of industrial conduit on a job site somewhere in the Inland Empire, squinting into bright afternoon sun with the expression of a man who has just finished a hard thing and is allowing himself one moment of satisfaction before moving to the next one. I had looked at that photograph many times over the years in that office during difficult conversations, and it had never felt as relevant as it did now. "I thought he was part of it," I said. "I thought he knew what she was doing and chose to let it happen." "I know you did. That changes what I'm trying to do here." "Yes," Thaddeus said quietly. "It changes quite a lot." I drove home the long way down Marengo, through the residential blocks up California Boulevard, past the old craftsman houses with their deep porches and their November gardens, through the neighborhood near the Huntington, where Mary and I had walked on Sunday mornings for 20 years, and where the sidewalks in spring were covered in fallen jacaranda blossoms, the color of a bruise. I was not ready to go back to the house yet. I needed the particular medicine of motion of streets I knew, of the ordinary world continuing around me while I sorted through what I had just learned. By the time I turned into my driveway, the anger was back, but it was aimed differently now. Frank arrived at the back gate at 7:30 with 2 root beers, the bottles not cans, which was the version he brought when the situation had graduated beyond casual. He had a sense for these things that he had never explained, and that I had long since stopped trying to understand. He simply knew. We sat in the lawn chairs under the orange trees, and I told him everything. The loans, the signatures, what Thaddeus had said about Daniel. Frank listened the way he always listened, without comment, without the impatient energy of a man waiting for his turn to speak, turning the bottle slowly in his hands and looking at whatever he was looking at while he processed. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the kitchen window where the light was on, and Kelly's shape moved back and forth behind the glass with the purposeful relentlessness of someone who had never once seriously entertained the possibility of not getting what she wanted. "What are you going to do?" he asked. My chest hurt with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding weight alone for longer than was wise. I looked at the first orange tree, Mary's tree, the one she had put in the ground, the spring we moved in when Daniel was 4 years old, and still believed that anything his parents planted would grow into something wonderful. "Save my son first," I said, "then deal with everything else." Frank raised his root beer an inch. That was all. Some things don't need elaborating. I went inside at 9 o'clock. The hallway mail was stacked on the table the way Kelly stacked it, her correspondence on top, everything else sorted by size beneath. I went through it without expecting anything, and found near the bottom a white envelope, thick and formal, the kind of envelope that contains documents rather than letters. The return address was printed in small, clean type. Superior Court of California County of Los Angeles. My hands went very still around it. Not shaking, just still the way a level goes, still when it finds true. I carried it upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed. Opened it carefully, the way you open things you already know are going to change something. Read it once. Read it again. Temporary conservatorship. Emergency petition. Filed by Kelly Marie Bennett. Grounds alleged cognitive decline, financial mismanagement, diminished capacity to make independent decisions. I set the petition on the nightstand. Beside it was the photograph of Mary taken at the IBEW retirement dinner, her laughing at something I had said, with the specific full-face laugh she reserved for moments that genuinely surprised her into joy. I looked at her for a long time. "Well, Mare," my voice held steadier than I had any right to expect. "She wants a fight." I picked up my phone from the nightstand. "Let's give her one." I called Thaddeus at 9:14. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been expecting it. Thaddeus picked up on the second ring. "I read it," I said. "I know. I got the court notification 20 minutes ago." His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had been expecting this and had already started thinking 3 steps ahead. "Come in tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Bring the petition." I was at his office at 7:55. He explained the mechanics of it plainly, the way he always did, no softening, no cushioning, just the facts laid out in the order they mattered. Under California Probate Code sections 1800 and forward, a temporary conservatorship could be granted on an emergency basis when a petitioner convinced the court that immediate action was necessary to prevent serious harm. Kelly had argued that I was about to sign documents that would cause irreversible financial damage, pointing to my pension transfer as evidence of diminished judgment. She used the trap against you, I said. She tried to. Thaddeus folded his hands on the desk. Here's what she doesn't know. An irrevocable trust cannot be undone by a conservator. Even if the court granted her petition, which they won't, she still couldn't touch the house. But a conservatorship would freeze your bank accounts, restrict your movement, and hand her legal authority over your daily decisions. He looked at me steadily. We need to make absolutely certain the court investigator walks into your house and meets the sharpest 65-year-old in Los Angeles County. What do I need? 2 things. He held up one finger. A clean cognitive evaluation formal documented from a qualified neurologist. Not your regular physician. Someone the court will respect. Second finger. And a written record of your daily activities, decisions, and observations, detailed, dated, signed. Something that demonstrates page by page that you are not a man whose judgment is failing. He paused. Can you do that? I thought about 30 years of IBEW documentation, job logs, safety reports, incident records filed in triplicate, because the union understood that the only protection a working man had was a paper trail. I've been doing it my whole career, I said. UCLA Medical Center was 40 minutes from Pasadena on a good traffic day. I made an appointment under my own name, told no one in the house, and drove there on a Wednesday morning while Kelly was on a call and Daniel was working from the guest room with the door closed. Dr. Patricia Osei was a neurologist in her mid-50s, precise and unhurried, with the particular calm of someone who had spent decades delivering difficult news and had learned exactly how much gentleness the truth required. She administered the mini mental state examination, 30 questions covering orientation, memory, attention, language, and spatial reasoning. The whole process took 40 minutes. When it was finished, she set her pen down and looked at me across the desk. Mr. Bennett, she said, you scored 30 out of 30. That is a perfect score. Cognitively, you are in excellent condition for a man of any age, let alone 65. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized had been locked. My wife always said I was too stubborn to slow down. Dr. Osei smiled, a real one, not a professional one. She wasn't wrong. I'll have the formal documentation to your attorney by the end of the week. I shook her hand and walked out into the November sunshine, feeling something I had not felt in a long time. Not relief, exactly. More like the feeling of stepping back onto solid concrete after a long time on uncertain ground. At home that evening, I sat at my desk and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote the date, the time, and a single heading, Daily Record, Arthur James Bennett, Pasadena, California. Then I began to write. Every decision I made that day, every errand, every conversation, the MMSE result, the name of the physician, the address of the clinic, the drive there and back, the route I had taken, the traffic on the 210. Every detail that a confused man would not have noticed and a forgetful man would not have recorded. I wrote for 2 hours. My handwriting was the same it had always been, the neat small print of a tradesman who learned early that illegible notes got people hurt. When I finished, I set the pen down and looked at what I had made. 41 pages in 3 weeks between the footage notebook and this one. Evidence. A record. The kind of thing that held up not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Thaddeus Court notification just came through. Investigator assigned Diane Crawford. She'll contact you within 48 hours for an unannounced visit. Be ready. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the desk and looked at the notebooks stacked beside my laptop. The footage drive. The documented MMSE result was waiting in Dr. Osei's office. Kelly had filed her petition, expecting to find an old man who could be flustered into looking incompetent. She had built her case on the assumption that I would not see it coming. I picked up my pen and wrote one more line at the bottom of the day's entry. I see everything. I was up at 5:30. I made the good coffee, the Guatemalan blend I kept in the back of the cabinet, for occasions that required it, and I set the kitchen table the way Mary used to set it when we had company. 2 cups, a small plate of sliced fruit. The notebooks stacked to one side, neat and squared, with the MMSE documentation from Dr. Osei on top. Kelly came downstairs at 7 and found me already dressed, already calm, already at the table with my second cup. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I said pleasantly. "Coffee's fresh." She poured herself a cup from the new machine and stood at the counter watching me with the careful attention of someone who had expected to find a different scene entirely. Diane Crawford arrived at 8:45. She was smaller than I had imagined from her name in the court documents. Compact, precise, with dark eyes that moved across a room, the way a level moves across a surface, finding the angles, checking for truth. She carried a leather portfolio and a digital recorder, and she shook my hand with a grip that meant business. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Diane Crawford, court investigator for the Superior Court of Los Angeles." She glanced at Kelly, who had positioned herself in the kitchen doorway, with a ready smile. "I'll need to spend some time with Mr. Bennett privately first." Kelly's smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind it. "Of course. I'll just be in the other room if—" "Thank you," Diane said quietly finally. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured her coffee without asking whether she wanted it, and she accepted without commenting, which told me she was the kind of person who noticed when someone paid attention to small things. I pushed the notebooks across the table. "I thought you might want to see these." She opened the top one and read without speaking. Her eyes moved down each page, steadily pausing on certain entries, returning to others. She turned to the MMSE results and studied Dr. Osei's documentation for a full minute before she set it aside and looked at me. "You anticipated this visit," she said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, and a careful one." "I anticipated the petition." I said. "The visit is your job. I wanted to make yours easier." She asked me questions for 40 minutes. What I did each morning. How I managed my finances before the recent changes. Whether I felt my decisions were being respected in my own home. I answered each one directly, with specific dates and examples, the way I had learned to speak in union negotiations. No hedging, no wandering, no giving the other side more material than the question required. When she asked about the cameras, I explained clearly. Ring Pro units registered to my daughter-in-law's cloud account, and my own Reolink units installed by me, stored locally on my own hard drive in my own home. A homeowner's right under California law, exercised with the full knowledge of what I was doing and why. Diane wrote something in her portfolio. Then she set her pen down and looked at me with those level eyes. "Mr. Bennett, do you feel safe in your own home?" The question landed quietly, but it had weight. I met her gaze and held it. "I feel watched," I said. "That's not the same thing as safe." She wrote that down too. At the front door, she shook my hand again. Her expression had not changed from the moment she walked in, professionally neutral, giving nothing away. That was exactly what it should be. I respected it. Kelly appeared from the living room before Diane reached the porch steps. "Ms. Crawford, how did it go? Is everything in order?" Diane paused with her hand on the railing. "The court will be in touch, Ms. Bennett." She walked to her car without looking back. Kelly turned to me. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were doing something they hadn't done before, calculating, re-estimating, trying to figure out where the ground had shifted. "How do you think that went?" she asked. I was rinsing the coffee cups at the sink, my back to her. Daniel had appeared at the bottom of the stairs at some point during the visit, and now stood near the hallway entrance, watching us both with his hands in his pockets and his face carrying the expression of a man standing between two things he couldn't name. "Fine," I said. She seemed thorough. I set the cups in the drying rack and dried my hands on the dish towel. Mary's dish towel, the yellow one, with the embroidered lemons that she had bought at a farmer's market in Altadena 12 years ago, and that I had washed so many times the lemons had faded to pale outlines. I folded it neatly and hung it back on the oven handle. Then I went to my office and closed the door. The letter from Thaddeus arrived on a Thursday. Kelly intercepted it the way she intercepted everything that came through the front door. She had made a habit of collecting the mail first, sorting it on the hallway table with her name on top and everything else underneath. I had stopped mentioning it. I had stopped mentioning a lot of things. She read it in the kitchen while I was on the back porch with my coffee. I could see her through the window. I watched her face change as her eyes moved down the page, the slight parting of her lips, the small straightening of her spine, the way her chin lifted a fraction of an inch. The look of a person who has just received news they had been waiting for. Thaddeus had written the letter carefully, every word chosen for ambiguity. The court was reviewing the petition with continued attention. The investigator's report had been received and entered into the record. The matter would proceed according to established timeline. Nothing in it was false. Nothing in it meant what Kelly thought it meant. But she thought it meant she was winning. By Friday afternoon, she was on the phone in the living room, voice bright, and talking to someone about the Pasadena property and finalizing the transition and exciting changes coming in the new year. I heard it from the garage where I was organizing my toolbox, and I kept my hands moving, kept sorting the sockets by size, kept breathing at the same rate. That evening, she invited 4 people to dinner without asking me. I found out when a catering van pulled into my driveway at 5 o'clock. I was in the garage when I heard the vehicles. I had been replacing a worn hinge on the side door, wearing my old IBEW work jacket, the dark blue one with the local 11 patch on the left sleeve faded from years of washing. I had grease on my right hand from the hinge mechanism. I wiped most of it off on a shop rag and went inside to get a glass of water. 4 people I had never seen stood in my living room holding wine glasses. The furniture had been rearranged again. Kelly had put candles on the dining table and fresh flowers in the vase that had held Mary's dried lavender for 3 years. The lavender was gone. I walked through toward the kitchen. One of the men, tall, somewhere in his 40s, wearing a jacket that cost more than my first car, glanced at me as I passed. "Oh," he said easily, the way people speak when they're filling silence. "Are you the contractor?" The room did something. Not a sound, not a movement, just a shift in the quality of the air, the way air shifts in a room when something true has been said that nobody planned to say. I looked at Kelly. She was already smiling, already pivoting, already managing the moment, the way she managed everything before it could become anything she couldn't control. "That's Arthur," she said lightly. "He helps around the house. Not my father-in-law, not Daniel's dad, not the man who owns this house and every piece of furniture in it, including the vase your hostess just emptied of his late wife's lavender. Just Arthur. He helps around the house." I looked at Daniel. He was standing near the bookcase with a wine glass in his hand, and when my eyes found his, something moved across his face, pain, recognition, the particular shame of a man who knows exactly what the right thing to say is and cannot make himself say it. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes dropped to his glass. 3 seconds. That was all it would have taken. "That's my father. This is his home." 3 seconds and he couldn't find them. I turned to the man who had asked. "Evening," I said. My voice came out even. I was proud of that quietly and privately, in the way a man is proud of things nobody else will ever know about. I got my water. I walked back through the living room without looking at anyone. I went to the garage and sat down in the old chair beside my workbench, the one with the cracked armrest that I had been meaning to repair for 2 years, and I put my hands on my knees, and I stayed there until the trembling in them subsided. I did not write in the notebook that night. Some things you record. Some things you just carry. Rosa appeared at the fence gate the next morning while I was watering the orange trees. "I heard her on the phone yesterday," she said without preamble. "Through the fence. She was telling someone she had just finalized a property acquisition of in Pasadena." Rosa's jaw was tight. "Arthur, she is telling people she owns your house." I kept the water moving slowly around the base of Mary's first tree. "I know. How are you this calm?" Rosa's voice cracked at the edges with the frustration of someone who cares more about your situation than you appear to. "How are you standing there watering your trees like nothing is happening?" I turned off the hose, looked at the tree, at the fruit hanging heavy and gold in the December morning light, at the bark I had pressed my hands against 2 weeks ago when my hands were shaking too hard to be useful. "Because I know something she doesn't," I said. That afternoon I called Thaddeus. "She took it," I said. "All of it. Every word. She's planning something big. I can feel it." Thaddeus was quiet for a moment, the productive quiet of a man connecting pieces. "She'll want a stage," he said. "Something public. Something that makes it look inevitable." "She mentioned a party," I said. "Her birthday, at my house." A pause. Then carefully, "And she invited the lawyer. She's going to, Art." His voice shifted warmer with something underneath it that might have been satisfaction. "Let her plan it. Every detail she adds is another nail." I hung up and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the orange trees in the afternoon light. 7 trees. 30 years. Every one of them still standing. Start making calls, I thought. We're ready. Kelly announced the party on a Monday morning like a project launch. "My birthday is the 19th, she said, setting her clipboard on the counter. "I'm thinking the backyard. Catering a small band, maybe 40 people." She looked at me over her coffee. "I've already told Thaddeus to come by. We can finally get the paperwork handled while everyone's together." I looked at her. "That sounds perfect," I said. She smiled the way she always smiled when she thought she had won something. By Wednesday, the backyard had been measured, photographed, and submitted to a party planning service downtown. Kelly walked the perimeter with a tape measure and her phone describing to someone on the other end of the line what she intended to do with the space once the orange trees were removed and the pool was installed. Daniel was in the kitchen when she said it. I watched his face go the color of old concrete gray, set something behind his eyes that might have been grief or might have been guilt, and was probably both. His coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand. He set it down carefully on the counter and walked out to the garage without saying anything to anyone. I gave him 5 minutes. Then I went to find him. He was standing in front of my old tool cabinet, with his hands in his pockets, not looking at anything in particular. His shoulders were curved forward, the way they had been since he was a teenager, whenever something was wrong, and he didn't know how to begin. "She's going to tear them out," he said. His voice was rough and low. "Mom's trees." "She's going to try," I said. He turned and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes that told me he had not been sleeping well either. "Dad, He stopped. His jaw worked. "I don't know how to fix this." I put my hand on his shoulder once briefly. You don't have to fix it, I said. Just show up on the 19th. He nodded, though I could tell he didn't fully understand what I meant. Rosa called Patricia that afternoon. I didn't know she had done it until Patricia called me that evening, her voice tight with the particular anger of someone who has been kept out of something they should have been told about months ago. Why didn't you call me Dad? Her voice cracked on the last word. Patricia was 31, and she had her mother's directness and her mother's refusal to let anyone she loved be treated as less than they were worth. I'm coming to that party. I know you are, I said. Bring your appetite. Frank met me at the coffee shop on Fair Oaks the next morning. We sat by the window with our cups and watched the December foot traffic on the street outside, people buying Christmas things, carrying bags, moving through the cold morning light, with the purposeful happiness of the season. You remember the '94 strike, Frank said. 3 months, I said. No pay. You told me something then. He turned his cup on the saucer. You said patience was a tool like any other, that a man who used it right could move more weight than anyone with a sledgehammer. I nodded. I remembered saying it. I had believed it then. I believed it now. You okay? He asked. I will be, I said, after the 19th. Frank raised his cup. That was enough. That night after the house went dark and quiet, I went out to the garden. The December air was cold and clean, the kind of cold that Pasadena got in deep winter when the Santa Anas had stopped, and the sky was very clear, and the stars were sharp and close. I walked between the orange trees, slowly, my hands at my sides, letting my fingers brush the leaves as I passed. I stopped at the first tree. Mary's tree. The one she had planted the spring we moved in, when the yard was nothing but bare dirt and possibility, and Daniel was 4 years old and believed, as 4-year-olds do, that everything his parents touched would grow. The bark was rough under my palm, warm still from the day's sun. They're going to try to tear you out, Mare. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I pressed my hand flat against the trunk. I'm not going to let that happen. The branches moved slightly above me, heavy with fruit, and the smell of the oranges surrounded me in the dark, that clean, sharp, irreplaceable smell that had meant home to me for 30 years, and that I intended with every means available to me under the laws of the state of California, and the 30 years of work it had taken to earn this ground to go on meaning home for 30 more. I stood there until the cold reached my bones. Then I went inside, picked up my phone, and called Thaddeus. We're ready, I said. I know, he said. I'll be there at 1:30. Webb and Rivera confirmed. I turned off the kitchen light. The orange trees were black shapes beyond the window, still and patient in the December dark. 1 more week, I thought. Hold on. The catering truck arrived at 7:30 in the morning. I was already up, already dressed, already on my second cup of coffee when the headlights swept across the kitchen window. I watched 2 men in white jackets carry folding tables through the side gate into the backyard, and I thought about the morning 31 years ago when Mary and I had carried folding tables through the same gate for Daniel's 5th birthday party. We had made a cake from a box because we couldn't afford the bakery. Mary had decorated it herself with a piping bag she'd never used before, and the frosting had come out uneven and wonderful, and Daniel had declared it the best cake in the history of California. Kelly appeared in the kitchen at 7:45 with her clipboard and her phone, and the particular energy of someone who had been awake for hours, organizing things in their head before they got out of bed. The florist comes at 9, she said, not to me specifically, to the room. Band set up at 10, guests at noon. She looked at me. Arthur, I need the patio furniture moved to the left side. And could you check the string lights along the fence? Some of them were flickering last night. I'll take care of it. I said. She nodded and moved on to the next item on her clipboard without saying thank you. I had stopped expecting it. I spent the morning doing what she asked. I moved the furniture. I replaced 2 bulbs in the string lights along the back fence. The old ones had been there since Mary and I hung them for a neighborhood barbecue 8 years ago, and they had earned their retirement. I swept the patio stones and set up the chairs and carried 3 cases of sparkling water from the garage to the kitchen without being asked. Rosa arrived at 10:30 with a tray of tamales wrapped in foil, wearing her good cardigan, the burgundy one she kept for occasions that mattered. "I made extra," she said quietly, standing beside me near the fence, "in case things get messy." My mouth curved. It was the first time I had smiled all day, and it felt like something unlocking. "They might," I said. "Good." She pressed my arm once. "I'll be right here." Guests began arriving at noon. Daniel's cousin from San Bernardino, a couple from Kelly's professional circle who air-kissed her cheeks and admired what they called the property in voices that made my back teeth ache. Patricia arrived at 12:15, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than most, her face pressed against my shoulder, her arms tight around me with the particular fierceness of someone who understood exactly what today was. "You okay, Dad?" she murmured into my shoulder. "Getting there," I said. She pulled back and looked at my face for a long moment with Mary's eyes, that same direct, searching look that had never once accepted a non-answer. Then she nodded once and went to find her brother. I watched her cross the yard toward Daniel. He was standing beside the grill with tongs in his hand, turning the burgers in the slow, mechanical way of a man whose mind is somewhere else entirely. His shoulders were tight. His jaw was set. He had been that way since morning, moving through the preparations, like a man walking through water, present in body, absent in every other sense. Patricia put her hand on his arm. He turned and looked at her, and something in his face cracked open just slightly, the hairline fracture of a man who has been holding something rigid for too long and feels for the first time the possibility of release. His eyes went bright and wet at the corners. He pressed his lips together hard and looked away toward the orange trees before anything could fall. Kelly moved through the yard like a current, drawing people into conversations, pointing out the potential of the space, describing renovations in the bright, confident tones of someone presenting a business plan to investors. The orange trees were mentioned twice, both times as obstacles. Frank arrived at 12:30 and positioned himself near the back fence with a root beer and the stillness of a man who has attended enough difficult events to know that his job today was simply to be present and to watch. I found him there at 1:20. The yard was full and loud and smelled of grilled meat and the orange trees and the cold December air. I stood beside Frank and looked at nothing in particular. "You nervous?" he asked. "A little," I said. It was the first honest answer I had given about my own feelings in 3 weeks, and it tasted strange in my mouth. Frank nodded. "Good," he said. "Means you understand what's at stake." At 1:25 I checked my watch. Then I looked toward the side gate at the far end of the yard, the gate that opened onto the street. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Thaddeus, 4 words. "Pulling in now. Ready." But I put the phone back in my pocket. I picked up the glass of water I had been carrying around all morning and set it down on the nearest table, deliberately, precisely, the way a man sets down a tool he no longer needs. Then I straightened my back and walked out to the center of the yard. Before I tell you who walked through that gate at 1:31 and what they brought with them, and I need you to do one thing. Type "ready" in the comments right now. Because what happens in the next few minutes of this story is something Kelly never knew coming. And honestly, neither did I, even though I planned every single second of it. One more note. This story carries some fictional elements woven in carefully for the purpose of reflection and meaning. Any resemblance to specific people or places is coincidental, but if what it's asking you to feel lands somewhere real inside you, then it has done exactly what it was meant to do. Thaddeus came through the side gate at 1:31. He was wearing his good suit, the navy one he kept for court appearances, and he carried his leather portfolio under one arm, with the unhurried confidence of a man who has prepared thoroughly and has nothing left to be nervous about. Two people followed him through the gate. The first was a man in his late 30s, broad-shouldered in a charcoal suit, with a DFPI identification badge clipped to his breast pocket. Marcus Webb, senior investigator, with the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. He had the particular stillness of someone who spent his professional life walking into rooms where people did not want him and had long since stopped being bothered by it. The second was a woman, Sandra Rivera, LAPD Financial Crimes Unit, in a dark blazer, her badge on a lanyard. She carried a document case and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Kelly saw them before anyone else. She was standing near the dessert table, with two of her business associates, laughing at something, her champagne glass catching the December light. She turned at the sound of the gate, and her face opened into a bright, welcoming smile, the smile of a woman who had been waiting for this moment all day and was finally watching it arrive. "Perfect timing," she called across the yard, already moving toward them. "We were just about to get started." She reached into her tote bag and produced a slim box of new pens still in the packaging, the kind of detail that turned my stomach, and held them up with a small, triumphant lift of her chin. "Whenever everyone's ready." I was standing in the center of the yard. Thaddeus walked toward me, and we met near the main table. He set his portfolio down without speaking, opened it, and looked at me once over the rims of his reading glasses, with an expression that asked one question. "Ready," I gave him one nod. Kelly arrived at the table, still smiling, the pen box in her hand. She held one out toward me across the white tablecloth, her arm extended, her eyes certain. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Kelly. Then I said in the same voice I would have used to tell someone the weather, "We won't be needing that." Kelly's arm stayed extended. Her smile held. "I'm sorry. We won't be needing your pen, Kelly." The yard went quiet the way yards go quiet when something has shifted, and everyone present understands it before they understand what it is. The band had stopped between songs. Somewhere behind me, a child stopped running. The December air settled around all of us like something waiting. Kelly lowered her arm slowly. Her smile did not disappear. It recalibrated, tightened at the corners into something that was working harder than it looked. "Arthur, the attorney, is right here. This is the moment we've been—" "I know." I stepped back slightly so that Thaddeus could move to the front of the table. "Thad." Thaddeus placed the first document on the table. A single-page official with the seal of the state of California at the top. "My name is Thaddeus Vance," he said, addressing the yard in the measured voice of someone who has spent decades making complex things clear. "I am Mr. Bennett's attorney of record. Before anything else happens today, there is a matter of property status that requires clarification." He turned the document so the assembled guests could see it. 2 years ago, following the death of his wife, Mr. Arthur Bennett transferred this property into an irrevocable trust under California law. He paused to let the words settle. An irrevocable trust means that this home cannot be sold, transferred, mortgaged, or signed over to any party, including family members, without authorization through the trust instrument itself. Mr. Bennett retains full lifetime occupancy. The house cannot change hands simply because someone asks, or because a pen is produced at a party. Several people in the yard exchanged glances. Kelly's business associate, the one who had admired the property at noon, took a small step backward. Kelly's voice came out tight and controlled. What does that have to do with today? We were simply, Ms. Bennett. Thaddeus looked at her over his glasses, with the patience of a man who has heard every version of Simply and been convinced by none of them. I'd like to introduce two people who are here today in an official capacity. He turned slightly. Marcus Webb, Senior Investigator, California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, and Sandra Rivera, LAPD Financial Crimes Unit. A pause. They are here to deliver formal notification of an active investigation. Not a family matter, a legal one. Webb stepped forward. His voice was even and unhurried. Ms. Bennett, the DFPI opened an investigation 3 weeks ago following a formal complaint filed by Mr. Vance on behalf of his client. Today's visit constitutes official notification to you as the subject of that investigation. He held her gaze without difficulty. We have documentation we'd like to present. Kelly's champagne glass was still in her other hand. Her knuckles, I noticed, had gone white around the stem. Across the yard, Daniel had set down his tongs. He was standing very still beside the grill, watching his wife's face with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not guilt, not shame, but the cold, arriving comprehension of a man who is finally seeing something that has been in front of him for a very long time. Patricia stood 2 steps behind him with her arms crossed and her jaw set and her eyes moving between Kelly and her father, with the focused attention of someone who came here knowing what she was going to see and is watching it happen exactly as expected. Rosa caught my eye from across the yard. She gave me one small nod, the kind that means I'm here and go ahead at the same time. Thaddeus opened his portfolio to the second document. The second document was a bank record. Webb set it on the table himself, a single printed page, clean and precise, with routing numbers and timestamps running down the left margin, like a column of evidence that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. On the date in question, Webb said, addressing the assembled guests with the calm authority of someone who has presented financial evidence in formal settings many times and understands that clarity is more devastating than drama. Pension funds belonging to Mr. Arthur Bennett. Specifically, his monthly IBEW retirement disbursement were deposited into a personal account. He turned the page so the table could see it. Within 6 hours of that deposit, the entire amount was wire transferred to a private LLC account registered to Kelly Marie Bennett's venture fund. He looked at Kelly. Under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 15,610, the financial exploitation of a person aged 65 or older constitutes elder financial abuse. That is a felony charge, Ms. Bennett, not a civil dispute. A felony. Kelly's chin came up. Her voice was sharp and controlled. That account was set up for household expenses. Arthur agreed to. The transfer went directly to your business account, Webb said. He did not raise his voice. He simply continued. Not a household utility. Not a shared account. Your venture fund. Kelly pressed her lips together. The champagne glass was still in her hand, though she had not drunk from it since Thaddeus walked through the gate. Sandra Rivera stepped forward and placed a second set of documents on the table. 3 loan agreements, each clipped separately, each bearing letterhead from a different private lender. These are hard money loans totaling $400,000, she said. All 3 are registered to this home address. The property is listed as collateral. She looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Bennett, are you aware that your name appears as co-signer on all 3 of these agreements? Daniel's face had gone the color of ash. His hands dropped to his sides. He looked at the documents the way a man looks at something he recognizes, but cannot explain, a piece of evidence of a life he thought he understood, turning out to be something else entirely. His voice came out stripped of everything except the truth. "No," he said. One word barely above a whisper, but the yard was quiet enough that everyone heard it. "A forensic document examiner has confirmed," Thaddeus said, his voice steady, "that the signatures attributed to Daniel Bennett on these 3 instruments were not written by him. Under California Penal Code 470, the production of a forged signature on a financial document is a felony, separate from the elder financial abuse charge, separate from the unauthorized use of Mr. Bennett's property as collateral under Penal Code 532F. He paused. Ms. Bennett forged her husband's name. He did not know. He did not agree. He is not liable. Kelly turned to Daniel with something urgent and raw in her expression, the look of a person reaching for an ally and finding the ground empty. Daniel, this is not what it looks like. You know what we were trying to. I didn't sign those. His voice was quiet, but it had an edge in it that I had not heard before. Not anger. Something harder. Certainty. I never signed anything like that. Kelly's mouth opened. Nothing came. Webb continued without pausing. Additionally, this residential address was registered as the official business address of Ms. Bennett's venture fund, without the homeowner's consent. Mr. Arthur Bennett was listed in tax filings as a paid consultant of that fund, also without his knowledge. This constitutes separate federal tax violations and has been referred to the appropriate federal authorities. Someone in the crowd murmured. One of Kelly's business associates took 2 full steps backward, as though distance might separate him from what was happening at the table. Thaddeus looked at me. I gave him one nod. He reached into his portfolio and produced a small wireless speaker, which he set on the table and connected to his phone with 2 taps. Mr. Bennett installed his own security cameras in his own home, he said. As a homeowner, he is entirely within his rights under California law to record activity within his residence for purposes of personal safety and property protection. Under the homeowner exception recognized by California courts, this footage is admissible. He looked at Kelly. With Mr. Bennett's permission, I said, "Go ahead, Thad." The speaker crackled once. Then Kelly's voice filled the December air, clear and crisp and unmistakable, recorded in the kitchen of my house on a morning she had believed was private. "The old man has no idea. We just need a few more weeks." A pause on the recording. A door sound. Then her voice again. "We don't need him to sign anything. We just need the court to say he can't." Thaddeus stopped the recording. The yard was absolutely still. Not the anticipatory stillness of before. Something heavier. The stillness of people who have just heard something they cannot unhear, processing what it means about everything they thought they knew about this afternoon. Frank Kowalski, standing at the back fence with his root beer held at his side, looked down at the ground and closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then he opened them and looked at me, and the expression on his face was the closest thing to grief I had seen on him in 20 years of friendship. Patricia's jaw was so tight, it had gone pale at the hinges. Her hands were balled at her sides, and the moisture collecting at the corners of her eyes was fury as much as anything else. The fury of a daughter hearing proof of what was done to her father, spoken in someone's own voice. Kelly moved first. "That recording was taken without my California Penal Code 632. Thaddeus said provides a homeowner exception for recordings made within one's own residence for purposes of safety and property protection. Mr. Bennett installed those cameras himself, in his own home. The recordings are entirely admissible." He looked at her over his glasses with the patience of a man who has answered this question before and will answer it as many times as necessary. Is there anything else you'd like to clarify? Kelly's mouth closed. The champagne glass slipped slightly in her hand. She caught it, but just barely. Across the yard, every face had turned toward Daniel. He was standing exactly where he had been standing for the last 10 minutes, beside the grill that had gone cold. His hands open at his sides, his face carrying the expression of a man who has been standing in a burning building and has only just registered the heat. Nobody moved. The December sun had shifted while the documents were being presented, and the yard was half in shadow, now the orange trees throwing long lines across the patio stones. Somewhere beyond the fence, a car passed on the street. Everything else was waiting. Kelly found her voice first. Daniel. Her tone had changed. The boardroom confidence was gone, replaced by something more personal and more urgent, the voice she used when she needed him to step into line. Say something. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Daniel did not look at her. He was looking at the table. At the loan documents Sandra Rivera had laid out, 3 sets of papers bearing his name in a handwriting that was not his, attached to a debt he had never agreed to carry, connected to a house he had grown up in, and that had been used without his knowledge as the instrument of his father's undoing. His throat moved. His hands hanging at his sides curled slowly into fists, and then released the involuntary gesture of a man trying to find somewhere to put something too large to hold. Daniel. Kelly's voice sharpened. Look at me. He raised his head, but he did not look at her. He looked at me, and I saw it happen, the thing I had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure for months. The moment when my son stopped performing the version of himself that Kelly had required and became, for the first time since they had knocked on my door in October, simply Daniel. My boy. 34 years old, and exhausted, and ashamed, and still underneath all of it, the kid who used to fall asleep in the truck on the way home from Little League with his cleats still on. His eyes were wet. He didn't bother to hide it. I knew, he said. His voice came out raw and unsteady, stripped of everything except what was true. Not all of it. Not the loans, not the signatures, I didn't know about those. He swallowed hard. But I knew something was wrong. I knew from the first night. His voice broke on the last word, and he pushed through it anyway. When she handed you those rules, when I stood there and didn't say anything. Kelly took a step toward him. Daniel, stop! I'm not finished. He said it quietly, but something in his voice had shifted into a register she had not heard before. Not defiance exactly, but something older and more settled than defiance. He turned back to me. I told myself it was temporary, that it would never go as far as she was planning, that I'd stop it before it got to this. His chest heaved once. I was lying to myself. Every single day I was lying to myself, because the truth was that I was scared, and I owed money, and I didn't know how to tell you any of it without you thinking I was a failure. The word landed in the yard like a stone in still water. Patricia made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a word, somewhere in between, and pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were streaming now, and she did not try to stop it. Frank Kowalski at this back fence had his root beer held against his chest with both hands. His jaw was tight. He looked at Daniel the way old men look at young men they are rooting for, with a fierce and private hope that the younger man cannot see and would not know what to do with if he could. Rosa had one hand pressed flat against her sternum, the other gripping the back of a patio chair. Her lips moved slightly, though no sound came out, something in Spanish, something quiet and private. A prayer or a blessing or both. I let her move your furniture. Daniel continued, his voice cracking and steadying in turns. I let her put your chair in the garage. I let them call you the handyman in your own house. and I stood there with a wineglass in my hand and said nothing. His voice failed completely on the last two words. He pressed his lips together, breathed through his nose, and got it back. I failed you, Dad. I failed you the way I've been failing myself for years, and I am so sorry. The yard was utterly still. Kelly's face had gone through several expressions in the last 2 minutes and had arrived somewhere I had not seen it before. Not anger, not calculation, but something stripped and small and genuinely uncertain, the face of a person watching a script deviate so far from the expected version that they no longer know what their next line is. "You're really doing this?" she said. Her voice was low. "In front of everyone." Daniel turned and looked at his wife, and I watched the last thread between them go slack. "Yes," he said. "Just that." One syllable, quiet and final, the way a door closes when someone has decided not to go back through it. Patricia crossed the yard in 6 steps and put her arm around her brother's shoulders. He leaned into her, not dramatically, not with collapse, just the way a person leans when they have been standing alone for too long, and someone they trust has finally come to stand beside them. His whole body shook once, a single convulsion of something that had been locked too long, and then went still. I had not moved from my spot in the center of the yard. My chest ached with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with my age and everything to do with the particular cost of watching someone you love carry more than they should for longer than they should, and finally set it down. "I know you are," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which was perhaps the last gift that 30 years of hard work had given me, the ability to sound calm when everything inside was not. "I know you are, son." Daniel looked at me across the yard, eyes red and wet, shoulders finally unlocked from the position they had been holding since October. I took one step toward him. I did not plan what I was going to say. In 30 years of union work, I had learned that the speeches you planned were the ones that came out wrong, too polished, too careful, constructed for an audience rather than for the truth. The things that mattered were the things you said because you had no choice but to say them. I walked to the center of the yard, and I turned to face the people assembled there. Kelly's business associates, Daniel's cousin from San Bernardino, the neighbors who had come out of friendliness and were now standing with the stunned expressions of people who had expected a birthday party and received something else entirely. Thaddeus at the table with his portfolio. Webb and Rivera standing quietly to one side. Rosa with her hand still pressed to her sternum. Frank at the fence. Patricia with her arm around her brother's shoulders, both of them watching me. I looked at all of them, and I began. "My wife's name was Mary," I said. "She died 3 years ago. Before she got sick, she used to come out to this yard every morning before anyone else was awake, before me, before the neighbors, before the street had any traffic on it. She'd stand among those orange trees in her robe with a cup of coffee, and she wouldn't do anything except look at them. I asked her once what she was doing out there so early." I paused. "She said she was checking on her investment." A few people smiled. The smiles were sad. "We moved into this house in 1994, I continued. "We had a 30-year mortgage, a 7-year-old truck, and about $400 in savings. I was a union electrician. Mary worked part-time at a school supply store until Daniel started school, and then she went back full-time. We ate a lot of rice and beans in the early years. We skipped vacations, we drove used cars. We did what you do when you've decided that the life you're building together is worth more than the comfort of any single year." I looked at the orange trees. "We paid this house off in 2019. Mary cried when we signed the last mortgage statement. I pretended not to notice because she would have been embarrassed, and she would have been wrong to be. The yard was very quiet. Even the children who had been running along the fence earlier had stilled. I reached down and picked up the house management manual from the table where Thaddeus had placed it 20 pages laminated Kelly's signature on the cover sheet in her precise, confident hand. You know what bothered me most about this? I looked at Daniel, not at Kelly, at my son. Not the rules about breakfast, not the rules about the bathrooms, not even the part about my pension. I turned the manual over in my hands once. It was that my own son stood in my hallway while someone handed his father a document telling him how to live in the home his mother and I spent 30 years paying for. My voice did not waver, though something behind my ribs was pulling hard in both directions at once. While her handwriting is still on the recipe cards in the kitchen drawer, while her trees are still growing in the yard, while everything she ever touched in this house is still here. Daniel's face crumpled. He pressed the heel of his hand hard against his eyes. Patricia's arm tightened around his shoulders. Her own jaw was trembling now, though she was fighting it with everything she had, the way Mary used to fight it, that particular Bennett stubbornness that showed up most visibly when the emotion was too large and the setting required composure. I set the manual back on the table. Then I turned to Kelly. She was standing very still. The champagne glass was gone. She had set it down somewhere in the last few minutes, and her hands were clasped in front of her now, with the controlled stillness of a person who has run out of things to hold on to. Her face was doing something I had not seen it do before. Not calculating, not managing, just absorbing. Present in a way she had not been since the night she walked through my door. You didn't come here to take care of me, I said. Not loudly, not harshly. The way I would state a measurement I had taken twice and confirmed. You came here to take over. I understand why. Debt is a desperate thing. I've been in debt. I know what it feels like to lie awake at 3 a.m. and add the numbers up and come out on the wrong side every time. A pause. But desperation explains a thing. It does not excuse it. And understanding why someone did something is not the same as accepting that they should have done it. Kelly opened her mouth. I raised one hand slightly, not to silence her, just to indicate I was not finished. She closed it. Families don't fall apart in one moment, I said, turning to address the wider yard, now not as a speech, just as the thing that was true. They fall apart one small choice at a time. One morning you move a coffee mug. One afternoon you move a chair. One evening you tell your husband's father's guest that the man who built this house helps around it. And if nobody says anything, if everyone lets each quiet compromise pass without naming it, then 6 months later you're standing in a stranger's backyard wondering how you got there. Frank looked up from the fence. His eyes were bright. Rosa had both hands pressed together now, not in prayer exactly, but in the posture of someone holding something precious between their palms. Growing older does not mean giving away your voice, I said. It does not mean surrendering what you spent a lifetime building in order to keep a peace that was never real. I looked at Daniel, then at Kelly, then at the orange trees in the long December light. And it does not mean that love, real love, the kind that stays, doesn't come with boundaries. It does. It has to. Because without boundaries, what you have isn't love. It's just permission. The yard was quiet for a long moment. Then I looked at Kelly again, and for the first time since October, her eyes did not look away. Now, I said quietly, I have a proposal. Thaddeus reached for his portfolio. Marcus Webb straightened slightly. Sandra Rivera opened her document case. Kelly's hands, still clasped in front of her, tightened until the knuckles went white. The yard was very still. The December light had gone flat, and even the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything look exactly as it is, no shadows to soften edges, no glare to blur details, just the yard and the orange trees, and 40 people who had come for a birthday party and were about to witness something else entirely. I turned to Thaddeus. Go ahead. He removed 3 documents from his portfolio and laid them on the table in a row apart, deliberate the way a careful man lays out the components of a repair before he begins. Then he looked at Kelly. Mr. Bennett is prepared to present terms, he said. They are straightforward. You will have the opportunity to review them before signing. I would recommend you do so carefully. Kelly's chin came up. Her voice had recovered some of its surface composure, the professional reflexes that had carried her through boardrooms and difficult negotiations returning now out of muscle memory rather than actual confidence. I'd like my own attorney present before I agree to anything. You are welcome to call one, Thaddeus said pleasantly. You should be aware, however, that Mr. Webb and Miss Rivera are here in an official capacity and will be filing their reports regardless of what happens at this table today. The terms Mr. Bennett is offering are available now. They may not be available tomorrow. Kelly looked at Webb. Webb looked back at her with the neutral, unhurried expression of a man who has learned that silence is often his most effective tool. He did not nod. He did not shake his head. He simply waited. Kelly's jaw tightened. What are the terms? I spoke directly without notes, without hesitation, the way I used to speak in union negotiations, when the other side needed to understand that every word had been considered and none of them were flexible. First, I said, you and Daniel will sign a marital settlement agreement, an initial binding document confirming an uncontested divorce proceeding. No dispute over assets. No claims against Daniel. No claims against this house or anything in it. The document will be filed with the Los Angeles County Superior Court within 30 days to complete the dissolution. Kelly's eyes flickered to Daniel. He was standing beside Patricia with his arms crossed and his face set in a way I had not seen before, not the soft, apologetic set of a man hoping to avoid conflict, but something harder and more resolved, a man who has made a decision and is done unmaking it. He did not look at his wife. Second, I continued, you will sign a loan assumption agreement covering all 3 hard money loans, $400,000, all registered lenders, all associated obligations. Every dollar of that debt transfers to your name alone. Daniel's name comes off every document. His credit, his financial record, his legal exposure, clean. Something moved across Kelly's face that I could not name precisely, not quite pain, not quite anger, something more foundational than either the expression of a person watching the architecture of a plan they spent months constructing come apart at the load-bearing points. Third, I said, you will vacate this property within 30 days. The yard absorbed this. And in exchange, I said, I will not file a personal criminal complaint. Kelly's eyes snapped to mine. That's it. That's it. She stared at me for a moment. Then her gaze moved to Webb, who had taken one quiet step forward. Ms. Bennett. Webb's voice was even and not unkind in the way of someone delivering a forecast rather than a verdict. I want to be clear about something. The Department of Financial Protection and Innovation has independent authority to pursue elder financial abuse charges under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 15,610. That authority does not depend on Mr. Bennett filing a personal complaint. Our investigation is open and will continue regardless. A pause. However, Mr. Bennett's cooperation and the weight he carries as the primary victim does significantly affect prosecutorial priorities and sentencing recommendations. He held her gaze steadily. I would take his offer seriously. The yard was absolutely still. Kelly looked at the documents on the table. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him the way people look when they are searching for something they have misplaced and are beginning to accept they will not find it. Daniel's jaw was set. His eyes were dry now. He looked back at her with the quiet, exhausted clarity of a man who has finally stopped pretending. Daniel. Her voice came out smaller than I had ever heard it. The boardroom armor was gone. Say something. He exhaled slowly. There's nothing left to say, Kel. Kelly's eyes filled, not with the calculated emotion of someone performing grief for an audience, but with something more private and more honest, the tears of a person who has just understood for the first time the full cost of the choices they have made. Her hands, still clasped in front of her, were trembling now. She looked at me. You're letting me walk away, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. After everything. I'm letting Daniel walk away, I said. You happen to be part of the deal. She closed her eyes. One breath. Two. The orange trees moved slightly in a small evening wind, and the smell of the fruit moved through the yard, that clean, irreducible smell that had been here before any of us and would be here long after. Then Kelly opened her eyes and looked at Thaddeus. Show me where to sign. Thaddeus placed the loan assumption agreement in front of her first. She read it, actually read it every line, which I respected, in the way you can respect someone's professionalism while having no illusions about their character. Then she picked up the pen. The first signature, the scratch of the pen in the December quiet. The second document, the marital settlement agreement. She turned to the signature line without reading this one. Her hand moved across the page quickly, as though speed might make it smaller. The third page, the loan assumption addendum covering the third lender. She signed, set the pen down. 4 signatures. 4 times the pen had moved across documents in the yard of my house. 4 times something had been transferred, released, concluded. Thaddeus collected the documents. Webb nodded once. Rivera made a notation in her case file. Daniel had not moved. He was looking at the orange trees, at the first one, the oldest one, Mary's tree, with an expression I recognized from 30 years of watching his face. He was trying not to cry and losing the argument. I walked to him. I put my hand on his shoulder just for a moment, just the weight of a father's hand on his son's shoulder, and then I stepped back. Frank Kowalski at this back fence raised his root beer very slightly. No words. He didn't need them. Rosa pressed both hands to her face for a moment, her shoulders shaking once with something she quickly mastered. And then she straightened and looked at me with wet eyes and a smile that was worth 30 years of anything. Kelly left on a Wednesday morning while I was in the garden. I did not go inside until her car was gone. I did not need to witness it, and she did not need me to. Some endings are private things, even when they happen in someone else's house. Daniel spent 3 more days. He slept in the guest room, ate breakfast at the kitchen table without speaking much, and in the evenings sat on the back porch, looking at the orange trees, the way a man looks at something he came very close to losing. On the 4th morning, he carried his last bag to the front door and stood in the hallway for a long moment. His eyes moved down the wall where Mary's photographs had always hung Daniel at Little League Yosemite, the IBEW dinner. Mary laughing at the camera with her whole face. He looked at each one as though committing them to memory, or perhaps confirming that they were still there. I almost let her take all of this, he said. His voice was rough and low. But you didn't, I said. He turned and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes that were done apologizing and starting something else, something quieter and more durable than apology. I went to the garage. I came back carrying the toolbox. 30 years of union work in my hands, the scratched red metal, the worn handle, the IBEW. Local 11 decal, faded to a ghost of itself. I had carried this box into more job sites than I could count. It had built my career, my house, the life that Mary and I had made together inside these walls. I held it out to Daniel. He stared at it. Dad, I can't. I'm not giving you the house, I said. I'm giving you the chance to build something with your own hands again. When you do come have dinner. He took the toolbox. His hands closed around the handle, and his throat worked, and he pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any hug we had shared since he was small enough to fall asleep in the truck after Little League. I held my son, and I did not say anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying. He drove away at 8:15. I stood at the door until the street was empty. Then I went inside and made coffee. 6 months later, on a June afternoon, when the light came through the orange trees in long golden lines, and the fruit was just beginning to set, the doorbell rang. Daniel stood on the porch in work clothes, the dark blue uniform of a field technician, clean but worn at the knees. He was holding the toolbox in one hand and a foil-wrapped tray in the other. I fixed the outlet in the garage, he said. The wiring was 1987 original. Fire hazard. He held up the tray. Rosa's neighbor made tamales. She said you'd know which container to return. I looked at my son, at his hands rougher than they had been in December, the hands of someone who had been doing actual work, at the toolbox, cleaned and oiled and bright. I stepped aside. The smell of the orange trees came in with him, warm and green and irreplaceable. You know where the kitchen is, Twaman, I said. We ate at Mary's table. We did not talk much. Some conversations happen best in the spaces between words, in the sound of silverware on old ceramic plates, in the way the late afternoon light moves through a kitchen that two people have known for a very long time. When the plates were cleared, Daniel looked at Mary's watch on the kitchen shelf. He had not noticed it before, or perhaps he had, and simply hadn't found the moment to say so. Mom would have liked this, he said quietly. I looked out the window at the orange trees, 7 of them all still standing, the fruit heavy and gold in the June light. She already does, I said. I have told you this story because I lived it, and because I almost didn't survive it with my dignity intact. If there is one thing 30 years of union work and one long, difficult season in my own home taught me, it is this. The people who love you will respect your boundaries. The people who don't were never there for you in the first place. I am not a perfect father. I waited too long. I made excuses. I told myself the quiet compromises were kindness when they were really just fear. Don't do what I did. Don't wait until someone is measuring your walls before you find your voice. God gave me enough time to make it right. I don't take that lightly. These kinds of grandpa stories exist in every family in New York and Pasadena, in every city where an older parent sits alone wondering why the house feels wrong. These are not small things. These are family story moments that define who we become. If this grandpa story found something true in you, if you have ever stood in your own home and felt like a guest, leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done differently. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe these family stories matter, subscribe because there are more coming, and every one of them is worth your time. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements created for reflection and understanding. If that's not what you're looking for right now, no judgment. Choose what serves you best. But if you're still here, I'm glad you stayed.